In an aquatic ecosystem, all levels of the food web act together to create an optimal habitat for aquatic creatures like plants, snails, fish, and things we can't even see with the naked eye. Come with me and see how we go from an overgrown and neglected aquarium to a thriving ecosystem. First, we have to clean this neglected aquarium. We remove the duckweed, hardscape, substrate, and drain the tank. Then, we clean up the inside and the outside of the tank until it's sparkly and new looking. Now that we have a clean aquarium, we can begin rebuilding. Using pea gravel in plastic media bags will help us build up the substrate. We pack it in bags and then rinse them out. Media bags are not mandatory, but they allow us to reuse different types of media between builds and keep materials separate. They also hold different types of media together so we can pile them without everything just sliding out from underneath. On top of this layer, we place bags filled with aquasoil saved from another aquarium. I'm using large rocks and a large piece of driftwood to try and fill in some of the central area of our aquarium. This aquarium is long, tall, and narrow, so it takes some planning to lay out the hardscape and boost up our rocks and wood so we don't have too much open space at the top of the aquarium. Now it's time to disassemble and finish building the hardscape. At this point, we add some aquatic pond soil, leftover aqua soil I had from an existing project, and some crushed root tabs. These will provide a nutrient-rich layer to help our plants grow. Next, we add a good portion of sand so that it is about 2 inches above the existing substrate. I've also tried to slope the substrate towards the back of the aquarium. Now it's time to reassemble the hardscape in a similar orientation as before. Then, using cyanoacrylate glue and some cotton pads, the rocks can be glued in place. This isn't always necessary, but with a hardscape and tank like this, if these rocks were to collapse, the entire hardscape would be spoiled. Cyanoacrylate superglue cures to a plastic consistency, and when combined with cotton or a paper towel, it is easier to create a layer that can be wedged between things. It is harmless to fish and will not affect water quality when cured. I balanced the driftwood on the rocks and also glued it in place. The driftwood was from the previous setup and I wasn't really worried about it floating up, but it still needed to be glued so that it stood the way I wanted it to stand in the aquarium. I added some spider wood, which followed the lines of the mopani wood and provided some extra interest in the right side. It is a slightly different color, but once it ages in water, it will look the same as the mopani wood. To add some finishing touches to the sand, I added some scatter gravel. Next, it's time to add plants. I added rhizome plants, which can be glued or wedged into the hardscape and should not be planted into sand. These plants include various types of Anubias and Java fern. They give the hardscape some splashes of green and help liven it up a lot. They are also tolerant of lower light, so can be placed in darker areas and not suffer too much. This is the main display aquarium in my home. I collected these plants over a long period of time and also propagated some in other tanks and outside of the water and soil. I wanted this tank to have plants everywhere, and so far with the rhizome plants, I felt I was on the right track. I then filled the tank with cold water, which led to some condensation on the glass. I filled the tank from the hose and tried not to disturb the sand, but there was some settling. Luckily, everything stayed mostly in place. I added filtration next. Filters clean debris out of the water and also contain bacteria that change harmful compounds such as ammonia and nitrate into less harmful ones like nitrate. The one I'm using contains coarse filter sponge to remove large debris, ceramic filter media to provide a home for beneficial bacteria, and fine filter sponge which removes small particles and polishes the water. The water is pumped from the tank into the bottom of the filter through the layers and then back into the tank. I chose this filter because it will not be very visible, it will continue operating if there are power issues, and it will create good water flow in the tank. The rest of the plants are stem plants and are planted directly into the sand or substrate. I really wanted large stem plants to grow and occupy the background of the aquarium, and I wanted shorter plants to provide some interest in the foreground but not to take over. I received a lot of these plants from trades with local hobbyists. To buy all these plants would be a big investment. Check local aquarium groups or local marketplaces if you're in search of plants. You might be able to pick some up for free.
Not bad.
Diffusing CO2 into the water allows for higher light intensity since a tall tank needs high light to reach the bottom. More CO2 means plants grow more easily because photosynthesis. To make a CO2 generator, we need a rich food source for yeast, which provides CO2 when it consumes sugar. We can create this by mixing water and sugar and then adding gelatin, which makes a jelly consistency. This slows down consumption of the sugar solution and allows the yeast to generate CO2 for a longer period. We dissolve the sugar in hot water, add half a package of this gelatin, and mix very well. In the lid of the large bottle, I used a drill bit slightly smaller than 1/4 inch airline tubing, squeezed in the airline tubing so it just reached below the lid, and then sealed the area surrounding the tubing with superglue to prevent leaks. Once you pour the liquid into the large bottle, you refrigerate for about 24 hours or until the liquid has set and becomes a jelly consistency. When the solution is hardened, we can mix up the yeast portion. Take 1 liter of warm water, 1 teaspoon of sugar, and 1 to 2 teaspoons of yeast and mix them together. In this situation, I was replacing an old CO2 generator, so I changed the tubing from the polishing bottle to connect to the new bottle cap. You can order a lid like the one I have with 2 tubing connectors, or else just drill 2 holes similar to the ones in the large bottle lid. When everything has dissolved, pour the solution into the large bottle. The green bottle here has tubing that enters some tap water. The CO2 will bubble through this water where any debris or waste will be washed, and then the pure CO2 will build up at the top of the bottle and flow into the diffuser in your tank. I place this in the stand and connect the tubing attached to the diffuser to the green polishing bottle. All the connections need to be tight so no pressure leaks out. After a few hours, the pressure built enough so that CO2 diffused into the tank. Seasoning the tank means letting the tank age in a way that beneficial bacteria builds up, plants grow, and the environment becomes safe for fish. At this point, I added some floating plants, Amazon frogbit, and I also added snails. Snails are tough, and they can begin building up a healthy ecosystem. They eat dead and dying plants and uneaten food and can also graze on algae. So do other creatures like detritus worms and copepods that likely came in with the plants and the substrate. The snails had lots to eat as the tank moved through its normal phases of brown and green algal growth. Here's a little detritus worm on the glass. During this time, the plants started to grow as well and the snails reproduced. This was my first time using a carbon dioxide diffuser in a fish tank. It didn't matter which plant I looked at, I saw new growth sprouting up from everywhere. I also saw snail eggs on many surfaces. I think snails are friends and I embrace them in my community fish tanks. Once the tank has good water quality readings, we can add some fish. I started with my favorite fish, celestial pearl danios. They enjoy a densely planted aquarium and lots of cover since they can be shy. I bred these at home and added about 40 to this tank. These fish resemble brook trout but are a nano fish that stays around an inch long. Check out my video on how I spawned hundreds of CPDs in the top right corner. It wasn't long before I noticed some promising signs that these fish were settling in. Love was in the air. CPDs are egg scatterers and thought this pearl weed was an excellent spot to release their eggs and milk. I don't expect to get any babies out of this tank, but it was good to see they were comfortable and thinking about spawning. Next, I added one albino pleco. I wanted to have a fish that would feed on algae, and I also just love these sucker fish, as my daughter calls them. He made himself at home and dug a lot of holes and was always finding different places to hide. He also poops a lot. I'm pretty sure this is a male because the males, not the females, get these whiskers around their mouth. He eats algae, rasps on wood, and eats blanched foods I drop in regularly. He also likes to redecorate. Soon after the fish are in the tank, it's time to give them some nutritious meals. I like to feed my fish baby brine shrimp, which I hatch out regularly. They love this yummy snack. I also left a bucket of water outside when I noticed some mosquito larvae inside. I wanted to see if the fish would enjoy them. Did they ever? I imagine they would eat foods like this in the wild since they went after them quickly despite their small mouths. When they aren't getting live foods, the CPDs like flake foods, frozen foods, and they also forage around the tank for small organisms to snack on. CPDs should be kept in good-sized groups and also in tanks that don't have very aggressive feeders such as scissortail rasboras, since they can be stressed out and may not get their share of food. The tank has been up and running for about 3 months. The fish seem to enjoy it and are not too shy since they are in a large group and have many places to hide. The plants grow thickly and need regular trimming. I'm not sure for how long I'll continue running CO2 since some of the plants, such as the pearlweed and Hygrophila polysperma, grow so rapidly and need such regular maintenance. But I do get lots of trimmings from my other tanks and love the lush look of the aquarium. Here's an example of some of the trimmings from one of my maintenance sessions. The snails are reproducing regularly and are pretty fun to watch with their shenanigans. This comparison shows the tank before it was cleaned up after it had been left for months, with no fish in it of course, compared to the early setup. It has very clear water, little algae, and lots of fish. The second comparison shows day 1 of setup versus day 90, and the growth of the plants and fish has been huge. This has been a really fun and interesting project, and I'm so glad to have this tank on display in my living room. Thank you very much for joining me on this journey. I appreciate you.